What family secret did you learn that totally shocked you? My great-grandfather was an abusive piece of shit and ended up murdering 3 of my grandaunts and wounded another. He then ended up killing himself after a standoff with the police. Found a Salem witch in the family tree. Not really a secret. Just forgotten. You should probably cut her down. Thanks for the gold. Love her. My great-grandfather may have murdered my great-grandmother because he believed that my grandfather was the product of an affair. I don't know whether the affair was true, but I know that on his deathbed he still believed it. His last words to my grandfather were, "I never liked you. Yeah, no? Because you weren't mine." My great-grandfather was a quiet, kind man and treasurer for his chapter of the Elks Lodge in Texas. He was attacked on his way home from an Elks Lodge meeting. He suffered amnesia and regained consciousness as a sailor on his way to Haiti. After landing, he lived in the country for a few months before getting into a bar brawl with a police officer and getting knocked out. He regained consciousness in jail. With a newfound memory of who he was, had told this tale to a priest from jail, who believed him and wanted to help. The priest wrote my great-grandmother and the American government and somehow convinced the Haitian government to let him return to America. He returned to my great-grandmother, had 2 children, and was a law-abiding citizen for the rest of his life. This story is so unbelievable that when my mother told it to me 6 months ago, I was convinced it was a hoax. She has documents, the letters from the priest and others, and testimonials of his friends that say this behavior was uncharacteristic. I dunno. Crazy man. Always knew grandma died before I was born. Just never knew it was grandpa who murdered her. My favorite uncle cheated on my auntie. Ended up knocking the woman up. She had the child and my uncle was forced to tell my aunt. Aunt divorced my uncle. He became an alcoholic and I had absolutely no idea. I thought all the times we were going for car rides as a kid, he purposely drove crazy because it was entertaining for me and my cousins, but it turned out he was just plastered. My grandfather had supposedly fought in World War II. Never talked much about it, though. After he died, one of our relatives inquired about death benefits. Well, it turns out you don't get any benefits if you strike an officer in basic training and go AWOL. They never really looked for him cause they likely knew he was under 18. Technically, none of us were really all that shocked. My father had an affair with his brother's wife, so my cousin is also my brother. My cousin doesn't know though. My aunt with a very holier than thou attitude has been having a 40+ year affair with a childhood sweetheart. This is a person that was always quick to criticize other people's family issues and tried so hard to present her and her family as perfect. Her husband is an arsehole to our family and she lets him completely get away with it. I guess we know why now. 1. My father killed a guy when he was younger. I still don't know why. 2. My aunt was adopted by my grandmother. Or at least that was what she thought. 30 years later it was discovered that my grandfather was in fact her father. Had her out of the wedding with some prostitute who left the kid with him. So he convinced my grandmother to adopt the baby that was found at the hospital. My grandmother died without knowing the truth about it. My grandma inherited several $100,000 from her stepdad. The juicy part is that to this day, no one knows how he got it. No one even knew he had that kind of money until he died. Since I'm from the south, my guess is rum running or something like that, but we don't know and likely never will. He was actually the pop star known as Lorde. That the women that my dad was having sex with, cheating on my mom, were all men. Bonus. They are still married 30 years later. The bonus is the most shocking of all. I didn't find out until recently. In my 30s. So at this age pretty much nothing shocks you. But it would have shocked me in my teens. When my mother was super religious, warning us against premarital sex. In my early 20s. She tried to stop my girlfriend and I from living together when we moved to a city where we knew no one. Obviously, we lived together. But we had to hide it from her when she came to visit. When some unmarried friends of mine had a baby unexpectedly. And the child was born with a physical handicap. She even insinuated to me that it was punishment from God for having a baby out of wedlock. So guess what? A few months ago, my aunt mentioned in passing that the reason my parents got married after only knowing each other 4 months was because my mother was pregnant. She ended up miscarrying. Which is why we'd never figured it out before. I wonder if she thinks her premarital sex caused her miscarriage. She's probably been passing on her own guilt to you. My white Jewish grandfather was once part of a black gang. He was the token Jew. That my aunt wasn't born looking like that. When she was younger, some kids in the neighborhood ganged up on her and attacked her with a 2x4. I never knew, and once I found out I just felt so sorry for her. I was never told what happened to the attackers. Have a cousin that has a full beard. Talking with my dad about him one day. My dad tells me how lucky the guy was to be alive. Years back, my cousin had the day off work and decided to pass his time fishing at the lake and walked into a huge drug deal. Guys beat the living shit out of him and left him for dead. Luckily someone shown up shortly after they were finished beating him, or he would have died. Has the beard to hide a lot of scarring. My family owned black slaves. We're Native American. One is mine. One is my friend's. Mine. Uncle killed a man in the old country. Gang fight. Picked up one of those big cigarette garbage things and hit another dude in the head. He did time in jail and was disowned by his family. My mom is the only person to visit him. My friend. He was told his parents died. Turns out his dad is his uncle and the woman who raised him, his aunt, is actually his mom. Edit. Old country is Taiwan. Edit 2. It's a smoking can. Thanks. Found out when I was 22, but apparently I had an older sister. She died very young due to a heart defect or something before I was born, but yeah, no one in my very large family ever let it slip the whole time. I only found out because my other 2 older sisters found a letter buried in a closet one day years ago, and they told me about it way after the fact. Never asked my parents about it. I can only imagine what kind of old wound that would dig up, and they don't need that. I just quietly visited the grave by myself once to leave a flower. It was a pretty unreal feeling. Edit. Whoa, what the shit? Didn't expect this to blow up so much. Thanks everyone for your kind words and for sharing your own stories. Certainly not what I expected my highest rated comment to be, lol, but I enjoyed reading all these, so it's alright. You might need to draw a diagram to understand this one. My dad was born when my grandma was 18 and my grandpa was 14. He never looked like his dad and always thought his mom had an affair. For context, my dad's family is all Lebanese, but he is very fair-skinned, which was partially why he assumed it had been an affair. When his dad's father, my great-grandfather, was on his deathbed due to cancer, a relative confessed to my dad that his grandfather was actually his father. My dad had my stepmom take hair out of his real father's head and had it sent for DNA testing, which confirmed it. Yeah. Little morbid if you ask me. So basically, my grandma had an affair with a married man when she was 18. Had 1, possibly 2 children with him. Then married his son and had another 4 kids. So my dad's siblings are both his siblings and his niece's nephews. And the man who raised him is actually his brother. Yeah. I don't talk to that side of the family anymore. That my mom is actually my grandma. My dad is my step-grandpa. And my sister, who is 13 years older than me, is my mom. And my biological dad was 21 when he got her pregnant. Edit. A lot of y'all are getting more upset about this than I did. And I was conceived on a picnic table in a park. That my grandmother didn't get a bad neck back from poor posture. Grandfather beat her for spending his savings while away working out of town. She turned into a cripple over the course of 30 years and committed suicide last February. Grandfather has been heavily depressed witnessing it all unfold. Not mine. But in my wife's family, her great uncle was killed by his wife and the hired hand. Poison was assumed as he was just found dead in the field. They were farmers. His wife married the red-headed hired hand, and 8 months after the death she birthed a red-headed son. Everyone in the family and the neighborhood knew except, I guess, the RCMP. This was around 1935 in rural Alberta. My great-grandpa died on top of my aunt while LARPing her when she was 13. Edit: it was my great-aunt. So her dad died while LARPing her of a heart attack. My grandmother pretended she didn't have a sister for 50 years. Recently reconnected. Great lady. My great-grandfather was a Klan member. And he was married 7 times. My dad was a huge pothead and barely graduated HS. Didn't do college. He is now a fire chief for one of the best fire departments in the country. WTF dad. Edit: you guys. I don't care that people smoke pot and don't go to college. It's just uncommon for someone of his rank to not be college educated, since it's a pretty big requirement. Maybe an inverse sort of deal. But my family were apparently millionaires in the late 1800s. I guess they had always been very wealthy. But between that wealth getting split up every generation and my family living on the run for many generations, all that money was gone by the time I came around. Only thing left was a chunk of property in Mexico that is completely worthless aside from a small bit of money from it cause there's a highway going through it. This totally shocked me because in my lifetime my family has been quite poor. Full on redneck on top of that. And lots of issues with addiction. Not so much a family secret, I learned. But when I learned our family secret wasn't so secret at all. Growing up, my grandparents would make popovers for every family gathering. For whatever reason my parents told me that popovers were our family's secret recipe. Or maybe I was just a stupid kid and thought a secret recipe meant nobody else made that food at all. Anyway. Fast forward about 20 years when my wife and I were at a restaurant and they had popovers on the menu. I wondered out loud how this restaurant knew our family's secret recipe. My wife got confused and asked to explain. Whereupon I immediately realized how dumb I was. She will never let me forget that. Great-grandpa was not murdered. He actually committed suicide. Mine killed himself after his team lost World War II. I had always known that my grandmother, while president of her sorority in college, threw a girl's application in the sewer because the girl was grossly overweight and socially awkward. Grandma then lied to the rest of the sorority that the wind blew the application into the sewer. Only recently did I learn that the girl whose application she lost was Linda Bird Johnson, the daughter of the President of the United States. Not my family. But I thought I'd contribute. Friend turns 15. And she's told she is adopted. Turns out that both her parents died in a car crash when she was just a baby. And her uncle adopted her and raised her. Told her that both parents were dead. A year later, a man messages her on Facebook saying that he's her half-brother. Turns out the dad lived through the car crash and later remarried. Her adopted parents were lying to her as they knew all along. The dad just didn't want to keep her. That's the secret, so to speak. However, the story continues. As her biological father wanted to meet her, she flies out to meet him. Stays with him. Meet his wife and her half-siblings. Struggles with the idea of reconnecting with him. Because she both loathes and loves him. Loathes him for not wanting her and getting a new family. Loves him for wanting to make a difference in her life and reconnect. She takes the plunge anyway. 6 months later he dies from lung cancer. Life's cruel joke on her. Ages ago I arranged a meeting with the local dope dealer through a real half-ass friend, and surprise surprise it was my dad. Needless to say, major questions were asked on both sides. My god, the look on our faces must have been priceless. My brother was molested by our 35-year-old babysitter when he was 12 or 13. The woman was a close friend of the family and was eventually found out. She was instantly exiled. Side note. One day while she was babysitting, I wanted to walk to a friend's house down the road. She really didn't want me to go and kept begging me to hang out with her. I was creeped out by the way she was acting. Could not have left fast enough. I couldn't understand her body language and demeanor at first, being only 9 years of age. Some years later I realized this sick FCK was actually coming onto a 9-year-old. Fkin Pamela. Maybe not me as much, but I got really into my ancestry. Especially focusing on my grandpa because he straight up disappeared in odd circumstances after he got really sick when he was working for the Navy and there was no documentation. Anyway, I get way into it. And someone was looking for him too. Compared details and it was 100% my grandpa's daughter looking for him too. She had gone through foster care but learned details about her dad. And was searching for her family. It was really weird going to my dad and telling him he had a sister. We still aren't sure why they gave her up. But she was born almost exactly when my grandfather died and my grandma remarried. So we think that had something to do with the decision. Still so many unanswered questions. But we still talk and do our best to research. Maybe we'll find more answers sometime. I found out very recently that my maiden name, and subsequently rest of my family's name, was supposed to be completely different but was changed by deed poll when my grandfather was 11 by his stepfather. So before my father. We aren't actually related to anyone with this surname. Some of our distant relatives were buried in unmarked graves behind the original homestead. Today, it's a condo development. There's no record of what happened to those graves. My uncle committed incest with my cousin from the time she was 7 until she was 16. My aunt knew, but said nothing beyond that God would forgive him. My uncle died last year. I was not saddened by this. My great-grandpa murdered one of his own children. The family was a bunch of poor backwoods hicks and having trouble feeding their kids. My great-grandma was pregnant and didn't learn until delivery that she was pregnant with twins. Great-grandpa's solution was to bash one of the baby's heads against the wash basin. My grandpa wrote a letter to my mom on his deathbed and this was one of the things he wrote about in the letter. When my mom told me my blood turned to ice water. The sheer evilness completely shocked me. Edit. There's been a few comments showing sympathy for my great-grandpa or even defending his actions. FCK off. This isn't a college bull session where we discuss humanism and philosophize about morality. This is something that actually happened. Crushing an infant's skull because you're afraid you can't feed him is evil. Plain and simple. In order to lighten the mood, I'd like to offer a more funny secret. My grandmother died 8 years before my grandfather. When he died, we were cleaning out his house when it turned out my grandmother had owned a bong. I later found out it was from when she had cancer and wanted to try medical marijuana. But I initially thought it was when she and her sisters were younger. I confronted her sister, my great aunt, about it at a family thing later on. And this was her response. What? No. We never did that. We just drank a lot. I love my great aunt. Her and my great uncle have taken it upon themselves to act as grandparents to us since my grandfather died. I mean, we were always pretty close to them anyway. Hell. I'll submit one BC. I think it's totally nuts. But it wasn't my family's secret. Family that I've known my whole life lived across the street. The daughter of the family married a cousin of mine. Etc. Learned just a couple years ago that the dad of the family didn't go away to the Peace Corps for those years he was gone in the 80s when we were kids. He was in prison for trying to rob a bank. BC. The family hit such hard times when their second kid was born. The dad is the sweetest person ever and we never doubted for a second that he would do something like join the Peace Corps. That kind of guy. But the prison thing was a real WTF moment for everyone. Dad cheated on mum with an 18-year-old student. Mum's revenge? Banging his dad. My grandfather then almost became my stepdad. My parents were separated for a year before I was born. My dad had cheated on my mom and she kicked him out to get counseling. He did. And without ever divorcing. Was counseled. Got therapy and came back and apologized to my mom. He had been dealing with some childhood trauma when it happened. and immediately regretted his actions. Edit. To clarify, it wasn't the year before I was born, but 1 year before I was born. By the time I was born, my parents had been married 10 years. This happened early in their marriage. Grandfather was a bit more important a Nazi than he admitted. I recently learned that my father had an older brother named Michael who died just after my mother and father met. My father never spoke about him, and my grandfather, who had started a massive manufacturing company in Sweden, became a different person. You see, Michael suffered from schizophrenia and was a diabetic. A few weeks before his death he went missing and nobody knew where he went except my grandfather, who had a hunch that he was up in their summer cabin in northern Sweden, because it was their special place where they would go in the summers when Michael was young. My grandfather went up there only to find the door wide open and the master bedroom locked. He busted the door open and found his dead son. Ever since, everyone says he's been completely different and that he spent most of his time in the cabin where Michael died. And I learned all of this because in his will he left me all his fortune and a letter explaining why.